So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Protiviti and Robert Half Collaboration Forum. This is week 3 of our new series, and it's great to see you all here. My name's Paul Middleton. I'm a Managing Director in Protiviti, and as usual, I'm joined here today by my colleagues from Protiviti, as well as by colleagues from our sister company, Robert Half. Our aim of this series, entitled Opportunity in Adversity, is to push ourselves further as we face up to challenges of the period ahead. 3 tiers of lockdown, Brexit, the economic outlook for UK PLC, and of course the approaching winter. But this won't be all doom and gloom. In Series 3, we want to create a platform for more of a debate on those topics and issues that provide us with an opportunity in this adversity to navigate the challenges that lie ahead. Challenges that are related to the impacts of COVID and that have had an impact on our professional and personal lives, and that are most important to you. In our first week, via one of the polls we ran here, you told us that one of your top challenges is how to effectively embed meaningful change, as well as how to manage your people. And last week we focused on whether mindset and culture or whether technology is most important in driving change. And we wanted to build on that more this week, but take another angle. This week, we're going to focus on leadership and motivation through looking at whether we should be leading by engaging our people more in decision making, or whether instead we simply need stronger, more decisive leadership in these times. Before we do that, I wanted to remind you all of a couple of key ingredients, as I have done for the last couple of weeks, to make this morning a success for you. The first is your participation in the debate, because without this, there is no debate. So I'm afraid I'm going to be consistently encouraging you to come off mute, stick your head above the parapet, be bold, raise your hand and say what you think, or at the very least, write it in the chat. Linked to this is the second ingredient, which is your ideas and inspiration for this forum. Please tell us the business issues that you are currently facing and that you think we should be debating in more depth in this forum in future weeks. And we'll run a poll probably next week just to kind of get a better feel for that as well. So in summary, after 30 odd weeks of holding these forums, we want to hear your voice more. I'll be more than gently encouraging you from time to time to put down your coffee and your croissant and to get involved. And if you're dialing in, you may need to press *6 to take yourself off mute. But otherwise, please feel free to put your hand up, write a question in the chat, or if you're really bold, just call out your question. As I just mentioned, during these forums, we will from time to time be running a short online sentiment survey and poll. These are so you can anonymously share your thoughts and we can see the collective sentiment of the audience in this forum. We're going to use a platform provided by our partners at Menti for this, and I promise you it's very straightforward. When we launch the poll, I'll let you know there's a link in the chat, and if you click on that link, it will take you straight to the question. All in all, it will take you less than 30 seconds to do. It's completely anonymous and secure. So why are we framing today's forum as a debate? Well, we believe that now, even more than during the apparent green shoots of the summer recovery, is that it's time for you and us, and you as our clients, our partners, our friends, to plan and deliver change. Because more than ever, without change, without disruption, we run the risk of rapidly becoming irrelevant in the dynamic world that we're living in. And we think that if you hear a number of perspectives on those topics that are of most importance to you, be they conflicting or not, it will help you make bolder decisions and hopefully the right decisions. So based on your feedback from last week, we wanted to focus the debate today on whether and how we should be focusing on engaging our people and leveraging their collective wisdom when making decisions, or instead whether now we simply need more authentic, decisive, stronger leadership. We chose to focus on this as we at Protiviti and Robert Half work with a range of companies where we see different yet successful cultures and operating models, from large owner-dominated small companies to small companies that have become employee-owned and controlled during the pandemic. Equally, we see large companies that have top-down leadership approaches to large companies that pride themselves on listening to the will and the mood of their people and ensuring that they act in line with this. Now more so than ever, the right style of decision making is critical if we are to successfully navigate the ongoing challenges, But should this be inclusive and democratic, where all the information is provided to teams, ideas are shared and discussed, and where people are motivated by feeling part of that decision-making process? Or at the other end of the scale, do we now need a more authoritative leadership style, where decisions are quicker, communicated clearly and consistently, with defined outcomes and greater accountability in mind? Or actually, is the best option somewhere in the middle of the two? These are some of the considerations we'll look at today. And to do this, I'm delighted to introduce to you our panelists, or as we called them before, our protagonists for each week. So firstly, I'm very pleased to introduce to you Emma Birchall. Emma is a managing director in Hotspots Movement, where she advises clients on people-powered innovation and change. She's a speaker on the future of work and a trusted advisor to CEOs and leadership teams on delivering growth through focusing on their people. Emma is a member of the advisory board of Barclays' award-winning life skills program, reflecting her passion for enabling people to reach their full potential. She also writes for the US business section of the Huffington Post on delivering large-scale transformation programs, and we're delighted that she can join us today. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Malcolm Melville. Malcolm is the Chief Information Security Officer at Refinitiv, a global provider of financial market data and infrastructure. Founded in 2018, Refinitiv is not quite your average startup, as Malcolm will explain shortly. So before Refinitiv, Malcolm was the global head of architecture at Thomson Reuters and has held senior positions at Deutsche Bank and RBS, and we're delighted that he can join us today. Before we let our panelists loose, as I mentioned earlier, I'd just like to undertake a quick sentiment survey to see what your thoughts are around the debate today. So you will see in the chat, hopefully, my team has posted a link to the Menti survey. So if you click on the Teams chat button, you should hopefully see that. When you click on that link, your browser should take you to a screen where you can vote in our survey, and we're showing that to you now. On the left-hand side, you'll see if your sentiment lies around leadership needs to have more democratized decisions, you can go to the extreme of 1 on the left-hand side. Or actually, if you think at the minute we just need stronger leadership, you can vote 10 on the right-hand side or anywhere in the middle. So please take 30 seconds. You can vote on that. It's completely secure, it's anonymous, and we'll then bring you the results of that very shortly. So while we wait for those results to build, I'd like to ask our protagonists, our panelists, to share their opening thoughts on this topic. So Emma, if you'd like to open with your thoughts, please, I'd be grateful.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Paul, and lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So as Paul mentioned, I'm an advisor on people-powered change and innovation. What does that mean? So here's a couple of examples of projects that I've been running in the last few months. One is with Brit Insurance, a global insurance company but based in the UK. And they asked the question, how do we create a future of work with our people rather than for our people? Because we know that these challenges and what we're looking at right now is so complex, so detailed, that no one person in the organisation, and certainly not even one leadership team in the organisation, has all the answers. We also need to bring our people with us on this journey. It can't feel like something that we've created for them and then pull them along. Rather, we have to create something together that we all move with together. So to do that, we took 10% of their population at random, upskilled them on future of work capabilities, so things like making decisions in uncertainty, leading inclusive teams, and then tasked them with creating a blueprint for the organisation that they pitched to their CEO, who then took forward some of those ideas. So that's one example, taking 10% of the population at random and bringing them through that change. It had a couple of outcomes. One is that the idea they presented their CEO with was something that wasn't yet on the leadership agenda, a brand new idea not currently on their radar. The second is that when they went to roll that out in the business, people recognised it. It had the nuance and the reality of the situation for people on the ground, rather than just the aspirations and good intentions of senior leaders who are perhaps a few years away now from those at the coalface moments. And a second example, a couple of months ago, we ran a global crowdsourced conversation with a professional services company, bringing over 100,000 of their people together to talk about what inclusion meant to them and how they could be part of creating a more inclusive organisation. So 100,000 people over 3 days on an online crowdsourced conversation. So it looks a bit like a Facebook platform or a LinkedIn platform, very simple. But the purpose being, how do we bring people together to share their ideas, to build on each other's ideas, to ask some important questions like, what can you do differently? What can your team do differently? And of course, what can your leadership and organisation do differently? And here again, the outcomes we achieved with that were, first of all, that leaders felt a big weight lifted off their shoulders. They didn't have all the answers, and they didn't have to pretend they did anymore either. They could say, we can set the framework for the discussion. We're going to show leadership in setting out the agenda for this and saying what we want to achieve, and you're going to tell us the how. And then second, it gave people a really important voice in a conversation where it is so multifaceted. How do we really approach inclusion? It means so many different things to so many different people in different geographies, and they brought that all together into the one conversation and used an inclusive approach to achieve an inclusive outcome. So my provocation to you all today is to think in your own organisation, in your own leadership approach or management approach, are you creating enough positive and constructive opportunity to solve questions, solve your challenges with your people rather than for your people? Back to you, Paul.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Emma. Malcolm, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Paul. It's nice to meet everybody. My name's Malcolm Melville. I have to say I'm not the first line of defence in Refinitiv. I'm the advisor to the first line of defence, to the Chief Information Security Officer. My good colleague Sean is actually fully at work keeping the company safe today. Let me start by introducing Refinitiv. It may be a name that's unfamiliar to many of you. As Paul said, we're a $6 billion startup. We were the largest division of Thomson Reuters for many years and were carved out. We are a 20,000 person global organization, roughly speaking, and an out and out tech company. And when and I was intimately involved in the work that led to the carve out from Thomson Reuters into private equity ownership by Blackstone. Most of you are probably aware, if you see in the newspapers, that we're in the process of being acquired by the London Stock Exchange Group. And if you follow these kind of deals, you will know that a first liquidity event where something goes into private equity ownership, the next step in the journey is to move back into some other kind of ownership. And we've achieved that in 2 years, and we've achieved roughly a 30% increase in the value of the company during that period. Which is pretty impressive for a very large company. And I'm sure that the owners and investors in Blackstone are very happy that we've managed to achieve that. But when we set out 2 years or about 5 years ago, it was 2 years ago that we actually became Refinitiv. When we set out 5 years ago, David Craig, our chief executive, was very clear that there was one thing he wanted to do, and that was to build culture with purpose. And that requires quite strong leadership, and it requires people to say, you know, we're not going to carry on doing things the way that we used to do them. We need to build a particular culture that is going to get us to that second liquidity event and give the return on investment. And we drew that into what we internally call our blue book, which is because our corporate colour is blue, and the colour is designed to reflect the culture. And the culture that we worked on with the people who know how to advise people on how to build these kind of cultures was that we moved to a culture of bold, open and focused. Bold, we're going to push boundaries. When you're working in financial services, many financial services companies are fairly traditional in their approach to things. We wanted to push those boundaries, understand how to take measured risk, encourage our staff to take those risks and move forward in those risks. We wanted an open culture. One of the foundations of Reuters over the 30 years I've worked with the firm has always been the trust principle. We need to build a very strong sense of trust that people can actually move together. And then we have to be focused. We have to keep taking ownership of our actions. And when things go wrong, we regard them as the knobbles that we get better by doing them. We don't regard them as failures. We just say, OK, that went wrong, but that's a lump that you can climb over and get on to the next thing. When you're building that kind of culture and you're looking to drive value between two fairly closely planned liquidity events, that means that you have to work hard on getting your staff to understand what it is that is expected of them. And we do that through quite a strong leadership. We have a very strong performance-related culture, and we drive that forward. And I think that we have achieved an enormous amount in the 2 years in that area. At the same time, we have to keep our business running. We have to maintain the service. The financial markets are not very tolerant of when things don't work properly. So we had to maintain service, and we decided as well that there were two other very important things that we needed to keep going that were part of our Reuters culture, and that was diversity and inclusion. And you're probably aware that Refinitiv is a leader in those spaces, and particularly over the more recent Black Lives Matter movement, we were one of the first companies in the City of London to sign up and say, hey, we're with you on that one. So that's an introduction to what we do. I'll hand it back to Paul, and I think Emma and I are probably reflecting slightly different sides of an equation, and I am looking forward to this debate.
Thank you, Malcolm, which is exactly what we want. So thank you ever so much for that. Layla, would you, just as Sean's showing the results for our survey, would you just like to talk everyone through these?
Yeah, hi, good morning, everybody. My name's Layla Tindal. I work with Robert Half, the Robert Half Executive Search Team in the UK. So looking at these results, I did have my suspicions it might sit somewhere in the middle or err towards stronger leadership. I think in a time where we're all at home and we're working remotely, employees are relying on leadership, but at the same time would like to feed in some of their some of the things that they're experiencing at home as well. So there is an onus on leaders, I think, to give employees the opportunity to come up with ideas. In a recent, so we've just launched our salary guide survey. There is a link in the chat for those of you who would like to have a closer look at it and download it. But 46% of employees have added new benefits as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. What are those? What are the incentives that are in demand? Flexibility to work from home, obviously, and well-being benefits. And organisations have approached this at different speeds, with different inputs from employees through surveys, through direct speaking through managers, and through HR programmes. Those benefits include things like mental health resources, wellness programmes, allowances to work at home, paid family leave, office-based childcare. That does have to come from leadership. It has a financial and a time cost in some cases, which does come from leadership. So I'll be interested to see how the debate runs, and would certainly invite comments and suggestions and insights from our attendees to see what current trends, what current programmes they are offering, indeed if they are actually offering anything to change employment contracts at the moment. Back to you, Paul.
Thank you, Layla. So Emma, I think you have your work cut out here. I'm surprised. I thought the poll would be more to the left there, given some of the people focused sessions and thoughts we've heard before. But Emma, if I can start with you, maybe, if we engage our people more and democratise those key decisions and push that survey to the left, is the risk too big at the moment that we won't be making those big, bold decisions that we so desperately need to survive as companies? Isn't it the case that actually we kind of just need a bit of stronger, better, more decisive leadership at the moment?
I think it's a really important question. And when we think about I think the first point is the kinds of decisions that we're making. Now, of course, you don't want to put every decision out to your people necessarily, but certainly you want to put out the how of those decisions to your people. So let's take an example. Deciding the strategy of your organisation. Now, it's probable that if you go to all of your people and say, what should our strategy be? People will be quite lost and not quite sure how to answer that. And this reflects some work we did with Linklaters a few years ago, where they said, here's our strategy, here's our broad aspirations as a business. And that was uniquely well placed for leaders to think through and to set out. But when it came to the how do we realise this? What could get in the way? What hurdles do you see that we can't see, that we need to overcome? I think that how part is where we really have to go to employees for those decisions. I'd also challenge the idea around that we get the most bold decisions from leaders. Now, most of us, as we move into leadership roles, have been trained for perhaps decades at managing risk. And it's a wonderful thing. It's a hugely important part of why we ascend into leadership roles and are charged with those biggest decisions. But every now and again, I think we need the provocation of going to our people and saying, actually, what is the boldest thing we can think of? And going to people who haven't necessarily been in our corporation for decades, perhaps even just months, or have moved in from other organizations, and getting that inspiration. I think sometimes we get bigger, bolder ideas from our people. And certainly when we work with leadership teams, often we hear, oh, actually, we kind of wanted, or at least one or two people in the leadership team have sort of wanted to do something as bold as this, but they never had a good enough business case. Now that they've got the weight of the organization behind them saying, no, actually, we really do need to be this bold. We do need to really disrupt our organization. They have the confidence that they can go and do that.
Thank you, Emma. So, Malcolm, then to turn this round to yourself, you mentioned those refinitive values of bold, open and focused. To Emma's point, should we not be, is now not the time to be embracing a more inclusive and maybe democratic style of leadership or values in these times, do you think?
I was listening to Emma and I was thinking, you know, is there so much between us around some of these things? I do agree that many of the best decisions will not come from the senior leadership. They'll come by collaboration, and we work very hard at including people to get that collaboration. I think the area where democratization, if you like, has gained a bad reputation is that when a decision is made in a room, it has to be carried forward thereafter. It has to be reviewed, it has to be monitored. But democratization has often meant that people left the room and thought, well, if I didn't like the decision that was made in the room, I can go and work on building a consensus around what I think that decision should have been subsequently, and then change it. And to us, that is an enormous waste of our corporate resources. We need to get the right people in the room, make the decision boldly with that level of democratization, that level of including lots of different views, work it through, but then carry it through clearly. I would say the problem we have with modern democracy is that people don't believe any longer that if they voted for somebody and they put them into parliament, we have a representative democracy. Let's be clear about that here in the UK. They then think that it's perfectly okay to then go and go, well, I put my name up, I put my tick on the box, but I didn't actually agree with everything they said. So now they've made decisions that I don't like. I'm going to go and do something different. And you know, that kind of behavior in the corporate world, that level of democracy is where we see that we waste a huge amount of effort on why we need strong leadership, why we need leaders to to facilitate and organize that discussion. When the decision comes out, that you move forward on it. Let me give you an example from my own space in cybersecurity. If people don't like the antivirus software that we have agreed is the best one that we should use at the moment, and they go and do their own thing, they take democracy, they get a few people and they go, hey, I found this wonderful new product from this company. I'm going to put that on my laptop because I think that's better. Let's move forward on that. That leads to a significant security risk. And there may not always be within that organization that works that way, there may not always be an understanding of why we needed to make a clear decision and then mandate it from the center and push it out. And I agree with democratization when the decision is being made, but when the decision has been made, it needs strong leadership to carry that through. And that is the role of a leader, even when the decision isn't the one that they would have made. And believe you me, I've had plenty of those in my life where the decision didn't always go the way I advised it, but it is then my job to carry that through.
Thank you, Malcolm. Emma, is that not at the heart of the challenge here, that people like the idea, but actually a focus on co-creation just creates inefficiencies that we can ill afford at this time?
So I think I completely agree with your point there, Malcolm, that once the decision is made, that's the democratic or co-creational process. Once the decision is made, you absolutely need that to be followed in the organisation. And certainly the example you suggest is what I would say is rule breaking. It's kind of like voting in your favourite politician, but then thinking you can break the law. So I completely agree that you need to, once that decision is made, people need to be on board with that. I think the other part I bring in, and around your question, Paul, around efficiency, is about the accountability point. So people will feel more accountability for the success of a strategy or a program or a decision that they've been part of making. When you have top-down decision-making in its absolute sense, which I know is not what you're talking about, Malcolm, but let's take the extreme to make the example. But if you take a fully top-down decision from a leadership team that hasn't really engaged a critical mass of people in the organisation, we know what comes next. A really lengthy, drawn-out buy-in process where you try and push the whole organisation to follow this particular decision and to be on board with it. And we know that that's always, it has varying levels of success, and you always have detractors and ambassadors in the organisation. When you have a more co-creational process, particularly around the how of the decision, what happens is you shift accountability from being completely at the leadership level, where people look at the leaders and say, okay, then let's see what's going to happen here, to distributed among the organisation itself, where everyone says, actually, we were all part of creating this change. I can see my idea reflected back to me. I can see some of the nuances, not all of them, not all of my ideas, but I can see some of the nuances, and I can see I was engaged in the process. So now I feel accountable, and I feel engaged in why I want this to be successful, rather than saying, you now, Paul, have to convince me as to why I should change this, because let's face it, change is hard. There's friction. It involves a different mindset. It's a bit of a pain for most people. So they really need to feel like this is partly their accountability and not just the leaders. And in terms of that efficiency point, I'd add one more point around that, which is that we see a lot of leaders with great intentions making decisions based on assumptions about what their people might want or need. So and particularly when it comes to generational cohorts, which is a whole different conversation, but thinking about, oh, well, we know that actually, here's a great example. So PwC, we worked with about 6-7 years ago with their millennial generation, because they looked at their millennial attrition and it was higher than they wanted. And they assumed it's probably the way we're managing them. Millennials are a completely different species. We all know that. They're completely different to every other generation in the workforce. They needed a different kind of management. So we ran a crowdsourced conversation with their millennial cohort and said, what is it? What is it that would make you stay? What are you enjoying? What's not met your expectations? And of course, they had opinions about being managed. Who doesn't? But the two main areas that were really behind attrition were, number one, they joined a global organisation and hadn't felt they got those global opportunities. They were still based in London or Slough or wherever they may have started. And number two, they didn't have enough time for health and well-being. They were a generation who were very aware of the longevity of their careers in front of them and knew they needed to invest in health and well-being, and they didn't have the time. So that stopped PwC moving forward on a set of assumptions, which would have been hugely inefficient because it just wouldn't have worked, and actually make decisions based on evidence with their whole team behind them.
Thank you, Emma. Scott, you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi, good morning, Paul and everyone. Just a couple questions and things that struck me is there's a lot of this is tradition, I guess, we're talking about change around a new piece of technology. I think in the era of COVID, and I choose, let's just say, BA, British Airways, for example, they're scrapping their entire 747 fleet. IAG is looking for investment. They're about ready to kind of go out of business, potentially. That's one outcome. So the board is challenged with some fairly existential decisions around what to do as a business. So I think the democratization or socialization of decision-making is largely out the window. And I think in the era of COVID, with no end in sight, and we're going into potentially Q1 and no vaccine, and the numbers are going up, there's almost a responsibility of leadership to make coherent decisions without really the input of anyone in the organization for the existence of the organization. And to me, I would call that leadership. And those are some meaty decisions that have to be done. I mean, isn't that what we're saying? And this is kind of from Robert Half perspective. This is about recruitment. And I see, what is a recruiter? A recruiter is somebody who takes the JD of the person that says hiring the role. They look at it, they go, oh, I need somebody with 5 years of this and 3 years of that and 2 years, and they give them bodies. And I think that's kind of the old model. And I think the new model is recruitment companies starting to wake up to the reality that we have to be more than that. And we have to anticipate what the company potentially needs and start looking at that and almost being their consultant and their guide and bringing those people in and introducing them to them to help make decisions. Elsewise, you become kind of an automaton to just produce JDs. So from a leadership perspective, where is leadership that goes to the board and says, gosh, couldn't help but notice no one's flying in your planes. You might think about a new operating model. You might need some capital expenditure. Here, let me introduce you to this person that does that on a global basis. And those sorts of things. To me, that's kind of more the traditional leadership.
No, thanks, Scott. No, that's fascinating. Let me let our panelists come back on that. Malcolm, would you like to just share some quick thoughts on that?
I was just thinking, as Scott and Emma were speaking, is there a difference in the types of decisions that are being made that requires these different capabilities? Again, just speaking from the technology space, we would not have Linux today if Linus Torvalds wasn't a benign dictator, and we all benefit from that. On the other hand, there are other decisions that need to be made which affect staff welfare and things that I think there is a far better democratization agenda for. The big decisions that Scott was talking about, when a board gets together and has to make those hard pulls, you don't often get the opportunity to have a democratized decision. In actual fact, for legal reasons and regulatory reasons, you probably couldn't do it on a democracy basis in any case. So our rule books are set up. And I was trying to understand, what is it that makes a decision suitable for democratization? And and I was thinking that there is another aspect of this as well. Leaders who are confident in their leadership are able to make undemocratized decisions because they know the team will follow them. I was thinking back to, I'm so old I can remember when Johnny Wilkinson played rugby for England, and he made a decision. I think he was playing fullback or something, and he completely switched the play around on the pitch. He didn't get the players around and go, shall we do this? He just said, no, this is what we're going to do. I'm the leader, I'm the captain. We need to do this, otherwise we're going to get routed, and turned it all around. And if I remember rightly, he then got a drop goal that finished some match and gained them the Triple Crown or something. And I'm just thinking, there are circumstances under which you cannot have a democratized decision, but there are other things that are really important that you do democratize. And leadership is really, as well, the challenge that we have as leaders is knowing when the team will move with us because they believe in us. And there may be other times when we know, well, actually, we don't have that right to do it. And I'm going to hand it back to Emma, because I'm just still thinking through and processing that. And I'm sure she's got some answers that she can put into the frame. Sorry, Emma.
I love the rugby example. I'm also just about old enough to remember that Johnny Wilkinson moment. So I think it's a really good point in terms of what kinds of decisions. Now, I completely agree. When you're setting out a new company strategy, it's almost unfair to go to your employees and ask them to create a strategy with you, because that's simply not the training they've necessarily had for many people in the organization. That's the training that you and your leadership team have specifically had. For me, it's much more about the how. So, Scott, to go back to your example about BA and IAG, which I loved, partly because I miss BA so much. Most of my life was flying on BA until about 7 months ago. The existential decision of what is BA going to be, what will IAG be in the future, I absolutely think needs to be led by a strong leadership team. The how, I think, can only work if it's co-creational with their employees, unless they're planning a 100% or close to turnover. Because the how part, for me, the how part is the equivalent of going to deciding that we're going to fly those planes very differently, and that the service in the cabin is going to be completely different, and people and customers are going to have a hugely different experience. But the best people to tell you how customers really experience it day to day, what they like and dislike, what the barriers are, whether something's actually practically workable, are probably those air stewards and stewardesses who live that reality every day, and who every day are thinking, if we just did one thing differently here, the whole process would be so much easier. We'd probably save money, but there's no real feedback loop to get that into the top. So definitely vision, I think, has to be led by the top. And I like your point there, Malcolm, that it's partly about a leader who we trust can make a decision we don't believe in and we'll still follow it. But getting that trust, I think, is earning that trust. It happens through engaging people at the right moments for the right parts, and with that how.
So thank you very much there, Emma. Great to see some comments and questions coming through on the chat. Comments around, flexibility is required to sidestep the potholes en route, but strong leadership is keeping your head while others around you are losing theirs. Absolutely. There is a generational theme coming up in the chat as well that I might just like to explore with you both. Do you think should we be, and maybe Malcolm, if I can start with yourself here, as someone, as you said, you've got a 6 billion startup there. Have you found that you require a different approach to different generations of people, or indeed that different generations expect and demand a different leadership approach?
That is a really good question. I had a fear that you might come to me with that one. So yes, we have definitely found it. We've had quite large graduate programs. Some of the people on the call may know we have a very large tech centre in Nottingham. And Nottingham is a particularly challenged city at the moment under COVID. And it is reasonable to say that young people don't appreciate the strictures that the UK government would like to put people under, and perhaps don't quite follow them in the same way that my generation would. And how as a business do we protect our business and capture that innovation and that drive and enthusiasm, comply with the guidance or even the law in these times, and keep our technology moving forward? It's a very difficult balancing act. And so what we have tried to do, and we try to make sure that the messages that we produce are cross-generational, but the way in which the message is presented takes account of the generation it's going to. And again, I come back to the space that I obviously know best from the cybersecurity world. For our older leadership, we still have very traditional cybersecurity training and awareness materials where you basically get presented with a load of pages of information, and it's basically an electronic web-based form of what used to be a book. For our younger people, we produce Snapchat or Instagram or TikTok versions of the same training material. Same message, different medium. And I think this is the challenge we face as leaders, is understanding how to do that. And then in the way that we would make decisions, for many of us in an older generation, we're used to sitting around a table in a much more formal one with room with board papers. I sit on a number of boards myself. You get board papers, you read them before you get there. You have a particular set of time that's allocated to you to ask questions. And it's a very formal committee stay type way of doing things. And that works well for a certain generation. For a younger generation, I can assure you that doesn't work. What we would have done when we were allowed to physically do it was get around a whiteboard. We'd all stand around, we'd have some bean bags, we'd have had coloured balls that you can throw at each other. And actually, we would have achieved the same outcome using a different technique. Yeah. In the lockdown era, of course, we're all using Zoom or Teams or and things like that to try and achieve the same. And I would say that that generational approach to decision making, we need to be aware of the medium that we're using to facilitate that decision making. A lot of our younger people who work in our technology space are very used to tools like Jira and GitHub and things in the technology world, and they'd like to make decisions by taking voting and polls on those kind of things, and they will vote for features and make decisions that way. And I did sit in a meeting recently where someone said to me, "How do you know that that was the decision that was made?" And I said, "Oh, it's all in the tools, you can look it up." And they said, "Oh, I've never looked at that." And I was showing this person who was not very different in age to myself, and they had no awareness that a younger generation were using this highly interactive way of voting on these technical decisions and coming to a consensus view. And what I would say is, I think as leaders, if we're of that older generation, we would do well to learn how to use these younger tools. So I've got kids who are both in their 20s. Well, they're not really kids, of course, now, but they've taught me all about how TikTok work and Snapchat and Instagram polls and things like that. And believe you me, we can use those tools and we can use them safely. I mean, we need to be aware of commercial sensitivities and security issues and things, but we can use them to actually get to really good decisions, which then across generations people can actually work on. The big problem area that I think we deal with is when you've got a mixture of generations. Yep. And they both become resistant to working in the way that the other one does. And I think one thing that I would say is every year as Refinitiv, we have a 2-day event normally. We won't do it this year for obvious reasons. You'll understand why. We took over the Excel Centre or a part of the Excel Centre last year. We get all the leaders together across all the generations, and we do a complete mix of different types of events where we actually make sure that everybody gets a chance to get together, understand what we're doing in the different areas of the business and in the different corporate services that we run. And we normally have somewhere around about 400 to 600 people that turn up to that event, and we used to fly them all in. This year we unfortunately can't do it, but we've done that for the last 2 years. And I have to say, when David Schwimmer, who's the chief executive of the London Stock Exchange Group, came to the event last year, I think it would be fair to say his jaw hit the floor. He had never seen that a company of our size could actually adopt that kind of approach. And if any of you want to know more about that, then feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I can wire you in with the people who we use to put on something at that kind of scale. It is not a trivial event, of course.
Oh, I can imagine. Malcolm, thank you ever so much for that. We've got more questions coming from Roland and Tony and others. Emma, I'm just very keen just to bring you in just for some brief comments on the generational point as well from your perspective, please.
Yes, briefly. I think absolutely there are changes in technologies and preferences that are coming through into our organisations as time passes. I would caution about making too distinct the point around generational differences in companies. And here's why. We have, first of all, much more diversity within any generation than between any generation. Particularly if you're a global organisation looking across India, South Africa, the UK, the US, you're probably having much more variance within than between. Second, actually going back to that PwC study that we did around the millennial cohort, we then compared those answers to surveying the rest of the organisational demographic groups, and actually they were broadly the same. And I think one of the conclusions we came to was millennials, who are now in their early 30s, so a lot less interesting than they used to be when they're in their 20s for organisations, emerged into the workforce at the same time as SurveyMonkey, as other tools for really easy data collection. So my challenge to that would be beware of over-surveying a specific group because those tools arrived at the same time that group came into your workforce. Be cautious about making assumptions about each generation, because we also know that as people are living longer, we see much more variance in terms of what people are doing. I'm 35. Between my group of friends, some have got kids and settling down, some are going into their second careers, some are we're going to be taking their delayed gap year. There's so much variance in what people are doing at various points. So I think the greater correlation you'll find is within life stages rather than generations as such or age. But that said, I completely agree with Malcolm's point that it's incumbent on all of us to keep up with the technology changes and with the tools that are becoming available, because they suit different preferences, regardless of, but also sometimes linked to age and stage.
Emma, thank you. Roland, you've been ever so polite with your hand up for some time. What's your question?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Emma and Malcolm. Good to see both of you again. Really fascinating discussion. I think I wanted to just go back to the point around efficiency. So I think it feels to me, firstly, it sounds like the what in terms of leadership, and then the co-creation on the how does make a lot of sense to me. Have you guys seen any examples of where leadership has been coming forth with proposed hows, just maybe 3 options, but succinct, but also complete enough that people can then co-create from there rather than from the ground up?
So leaders putting forward almost something to test with their people rather than saying here's a blank slate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so one organisation we work with in Ireland, and this was just after the financial crisis, so they're in a really tough spot. People have had a really, really tough time. And they wanted to reignite their sense of the values they had in the organisation and really inspire people around the future. It was a very difficult moment. Now, our recommendation to them was, don't just ask people what values should we have in the organisation, put out a set of values and get people's perspectives on them, get them to nuance them, say what they think that value means to them in their day-to-day work. So exactly to your point, Roland, they set out almost a prototype for people to challenge. And what we found was most of the values went down pretty well, and they nuanced, here's actually some of the barriers to achieving that and so on. But one value didn't go down well, and that was customer focus, which you'd think in a bank was an obvious value. What's controversial about that? And what people were saying, and this is 11,000 people on the platform, who said to their leaders, it's not about customer focus, it's about people focus. We've all had a really hard time. That's us as employees, our suppliers, our customers. It's going to be about the humanity of this experience, not just a ruthless focus on customers that then can leave other things left to the side. So I think a really good point. Putting out prototypes and getting people to challenge them rather than a completely blank sheet of paper can often be more constructive.
If I may, Malcolm, I don't know if you wish to come back on that, but I thought I might just shift gears a little bit and just bring to you a slightly different perspective that's been coming through on the chat and elsewhere as well. But given we've got these two styles of leadership here, from democratization to strong leadership, but within that there is a focus on performance and how we value our workforce. And do you think at this time we should be looking to carry people who are low performers or whose performance has changed over lockdown? What are your views on that if you're driving this high performance culture?
That is a really great question. Before I answer that, can I just flip back to Roland? I would say one area where we found that people have a really vested interest in helping decision making, and you can read about it on the web. The journey we went through. We looked at our sustainability agenda and we asked employees to help us come up with that. As a result of that, we are planting forests all over the world. Some of you may have seen the article I released on LinkedIn about that. And that was something where a decision was made by the employees. It was an issue that was really close to their heart, and we democratized the decision. And from our offices in India to where they actually physically went out and planted the trees, to our offices in Europe where we actually own a forest now and are planting a forest up here in Scotland. Our ESG agenda has really taken off because we've done that, because there's such a strong sense of ownership of it, and it's something that people are so interested in, which is a little bit strange when you think about the kind of company that we are as a tech company, perhaps. But and then so Paul, coming back to what do we do with the people who don't perform as well as we would like them to. This is something that I think as leaders we need to think very seriously about. I was talking with a few people about this recently, and it is something that has concerned us. We have people who were excellent performers in the office who are finding it really hard to work at home, and we have vice versa, and we have other people who perform well in both settings. And particularly with a high performance culture, what do we do about it? Well, we have to sometimes take very difficult decisions because, which are decisions that we would make in conjunction with specialist advice as well. And I don't really want to dwell on those edge cases because I don't think that's fair. I think the bigger points that we would make is I think it is incumbent on us to make sure that we've got really good support organisations for people, and understand that the reason that people may not perform is as well as they were able to in the office may well be related to personal circumstances. And as a firm, we have taken it very seriously. We have engaged the services of people like psychologists and psychiatrists and people in the to actually help us at the corporate level and then make those services available to staff. Let's be honest about it. I mean, I was interested in what Emma said about not being with BA. BA are pleading with me to go back flying with them again. I was known by name to them on the Edinburgh to London route because I was doing it so often. And we are saving a huge amount of money on travel. We can invest that money in our people.
Yeah.
It's a fairly short order changeover, and so where we see that people aren't performing, we build support structures around them, try and understand why. Some people are resistant to telling us why because it may be very personal reasons, and we have to be mindful of that. But in general, we have found that people feel bad because they know if they were high performers and they're not performing now, they understand they're not performing and they want help. But very often, and I would say this is particularly true in English, maybe European culture, we're not always that good at asking for help when we need it. And I think it's particularly coming back to our inclusion agenda, we worked very hard on the mental health year, which was last year, of course, but it was just as well that we did it all because we actually geared ourselves up. We were ready for this. And I would challenge people, don't eliminate people in the short term just because they can't perform at home. See if we can find a way of doing it. We have some of our offices that are specifically opened at the moment for people who need a COVID safe space that they can go into to work in order to be able to perform. And we don't generally have our offices open, but we've opened them for specific people in order to support them doing that.
Thank you, Malcolm. Emma, would you go further than that? And almost from your perspective, do you think there's almost more of an ethical duty at the minute to be helping people perform and maybe being more tolerant towards what we would describe previously as underperformance in these difficult times?
It's such a challenging one. I think we're all learning from the ground up on this point. And one of the biggest questions that I'm speaking to organisations about at the moment is how do you fairly assess performance? Completely to your point, Malcolm. If one of your team is a single father with 2 young children, how do you compare that person's performance, knowing that they're homeschooling children at the same time as trying to do meetings and so on, with someone who's single in a flat share with strangers? I mean, neither of those situations are easy. They both come with different challenges, but how do you compare performance when we really can't take the employee's experience and personal circumstance out of the equation? I think the only thing I'd add to or more likely disagree with Malcolm on this point is patience. I think particularly when you've got people who are otherwise high performers who are taking a dip right now, patience is really important. As Malcolm said, those are the people who are going to be incredibly aware of that because it's so linked to their identity. So having that patience is really important. And then I suppose the ethical point comes in much more with people who are perhaps average or perhaps even low performers before this point, who now the organisation can't carry. And I think we've seen a lot of companies trying to delay redundancies or give more generous redundancy packages to people who need to be helped to exit the organisation at this time, with the awareness of how tough the job market is. But I'm sure actually your colleagues at Robert Half will have a really interesting perspective on that. But certainly a challenge that we're all learning through at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's maybe just turn this to kind of a practical perspective then. So as leaders in companies, and be it whether we're coming at this from this democratization angle or maybe a stronger leadership angle, how should we best monitor and assess whether we are being effective in that approach or not? Be it, as I say, be it taking decisions to our people or providing that strong leadership which does give the right path. Malcolm, any thoughts on, from your experience, how we should reflect on whether we're being successful or not?
So I think, so my top tip is monitor people a lot. You'd expect me to say that, but when we're monitoring, make sure that people know that the monitoring is going on and share the data with them. So we use a number of different tools. We use a lot of the tools that are built into things like Office 365. I'll call it out. I guess everybody uses it. Use the tools that are available, but don't grab the data and just steal it for management purposes. Make sure that people know that you're using that data and why you're using it. So we coming from a data company, we collect data about just about everything, and we always talk about the fact that if you can't measure something, you're not going to know whether it's getting better or not. So we need to measure things, but we need to as well make sure that it's a win-win both for the employee and the firm. So we look at that quite clearly as data points. One thing I would say is we need to be as strong as well as leaders, coming back to the previous point, where we're monitoring and we're seeing that underperforming is happening, that may affect people's remuneration, right? If they're on bonus or performance related remuneration, we should not be shy, in my opinion, of having that direct conversation. You are underperforming, so the remuneration that is associated with your performance will change as a result of that. I don't see that as different to offering them the right level of support. Because otherwise you create unfairness across the organisation. So we're going through, as most of the financial services community, as our performance round at the moment. And we are being quite strong about that. We're maintaining the normal distribution curve. We do all the things that we usually do. That's fairness, but we're using the data that we get from these tools, but making sure that staff get to see that data. They don't just get to see the end point, the results, and then get told, oh, your performance is at this level. We actually share all the underlying data, and people can see that data as it's being collected so that they know how they can, if they wanted to, I guess, game the system, but more importantly, how they can actually contribute.
Thank you, Malcolm. Emma, closing thoughts from yourself and top tips. Do you agree with what Malcolm said there, particularly around monitoring?
To an extent, yes. I think the point I would make is that it needs to stay in an adult-to-adult relationship. So as an organisation, organisations perhaps in previous years have been more parent-child. The organisation is the parent, your employees are the children. You set out the rules, people follow the rules, or else. Or it's very much, we're in control, you guys just do what you need to do to get things done and to be in your own position. And I think we're seeing a shift in most very forward-thinking organisations to be more adult to adult. Now that of course is part of the reason why we push co-creation so much, but I think it also makes sense in this space as well. What Malcolm's described as being clear with people about how you're collecting data, what you're using it for, and also in that performance management process of saying, this is an evidence-based decision, we agreed to these terms and this is how we're now measuring performance. As long as it's done in an adult to adult way, we're fine. I think the risk comes when when we're measuring things with either poor proxies, so we're measuring keystrokes or screen time as a measure of performance, which, let's face it, there are very few organisations where that's an accurate measure. People actually just feel much more controlled and under surveillance. It's not a fair proxy. But yeah, making sure that we're using the right data for the right outcomes, and that it's been an adult to adult with consent, and we both understand and agree to it, I think is really important.
Emma, thank you ever so much for that. We have run out of time. That's been a fascinating session. I hope you can see some of the feedback in the chat, and it's been great to see all that coming through, and thank you for your questions. I do hope I've managed to get to most of the questions, but apologies if I didn't get to yours directly. I'd really like to thank both Emma and Malcolm for their time this morning. I think that's a fascinating debate. Very, very grateful for you giving us your time. If you've liked what you've heard, everyone, please feel free to contact Emma and Malcolm directly or us at Protiviti and Robert Half. I'm very happy to carry on the discussion. Our challenge to everyone here is to put all this into action. Be yourselves, be authentic, I think is the most important thing in order to face your own future with confidence. Next week, we have the Chief People and Procurement Officer from TalkTalk, Daniel Casimir, to talk about how we best achieve work-life balance, finding and managing the right talent, and many other perspectives. So until next week, I would just say in the chat now, you can also see the Robert Half salary guide as well, if that's something you'd like to see. But until next week, on behalf of my Protiviti and Robert Half team, I'd firstly like to wish Layla a happy birthday, but also extend our best wishes to you all. Stay safe, be kind to each other, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you ever so much, everyone. Goodbye.